Yo, speak up.
So I would like to call this meeting of the Historic Resources Board to order. Apologies for it being late.
Recording in progress.
Sorry. I'd like to call this meeting of the Historic Resources Board to order. And my apologies for it being late. Veronica, will you call roll for us?
Yes, Chair Willis,
Present.
Vice Chair Pease,
Present.
Board Member Eagleson Cheslowich,
Present.
Board Member Heinrich,
Present.
Board Member McKinnon is absent, Board Member Roman,
Present.
Board Member Wimmer.
Present.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. Do we have members of the public that would like to speak?
For item number 2, nothing for oral communications.
Thank you. Do we have any agenda changes or additions or deletions?
No changes.
Thank you. And schedule of meetings and assignments. We have not gotten very far on scheduling a retreat. I know everybody has summer plans, but I'd really like to do it during the summer. We have some I think it would work better if we could do it on a Saturday. And I know that's a problem for staff.
Possibly we could take this up after the huge item that we have on our agenda today.
Okay.
Our two
So
items.
let's get back to
Yeah,
scheduling. Okay, good idea. Thank you. And moving on to the huge item on our agenda today. Let's talk about the 3200 Park Boulevard Portage project.
Does she have to do a notice?
Or did she not read that? I don't have the
Yeah.
agenda in front of me. You want to hand it to me and I'll read it?
Yeah.
This is item one. I would like to introduce Claire Raybold, and the item is 3200 Park Boulevard, or 340 Portage. It's a recommendation on the applicant's request for an approval of a planned community zone application to allow the redevelopment of a 14.65 acre site at 200 to 404 Portage Avenue, 3040, 3250 Park Boulevard, 3201, 3225 Ash Street, and 278 Lambert. The project also includes a development agreement, comprehensive plan amendment, and vesting tentative map. The environmental assessment, there's been a draft EIR for the 200 Portage Townhome development, which was circulated September 16th, November 15th last year. The final EIR was made available for public review on May 15th, 2023. The proposed development agreement is evaluated as alternative 3 in the draft EIR. The zone district is RM30 and GM zone. And Claire.
Good morning, board members. As Ms. French noted, the project before you today is 3200 Park, often known as the Fry site. 340 Portage Avenue is often referenced as the Cannery Building address. So just a quick summary on overview again on the project parcels. So the project includes taking 5 parcels, one of which is a currently 12.5 acre parcel, and then some smaller parcels, making a 14.6 acre site, and then subdividing that into 5 separate parcels, one of which would be the Cannery parcel, one that contains the Ash office building that's existing today, one that contains the Audi building that's existing today, one that would be proposed for 74 new townhomes, and one that would be dedicated to the city that's 3.25 acres for the purposes of an affordable housing project and a public park. I wanted to provide and go into a little bit more detail again about some of the project background and how we got here. So back in December 2019, Fry's vacated the site. There are ongoing research and development uses at this facility within the Cannery building. The Ash office building is existing today, and the Audi building is also existing today. In September 2020, Sobrato filed a request for a zoning text amendment to allow for reuse of the site without with any ratio of the allowed non-conforming uses, so not restricting. There's an allowance in the code that allows for the non-conforming uses to continue in perpetuity, but only in a specific ratio. There was no formal decision on that project, but the director did indicate it's our intent to not approve or not recommend approval of that request. Following that, in November 2020, Sobrato filed a Senate Bill 330 pre-application, which was followed by a formal architectural review application for a 91-unit townhome development on a portion of the site. In 2021, staff requested council interpretation of the code with respect to non-conforming uses. That discussion had continued. A couple of meetings in, I believe, June and August of that year, council formed the ad hoc committee in October 2021. The ad hoc committee met from December 2021 to May 2022 to negotiate the broad terms of the development agreement. In June 2022, Council held a closed session supporting and agreed to support the concept being presented before you today. And asked staff to do a pre-screening application for the planned community zonings that were proposed in development agreement as required by the code, and to daylight the project to the public and kick off the public process for the development agreement. And that was in August of 2022. And there, at the same time, they directed staff to also prepare a tolling agreement. And what that tolling agreement does is it puts that 91 unit townhome development and the continued processing of that, of the architectural review plans on hold while we continue to process this development agreement. So it vests our rights to continue under that Senate Bill 330 application if we can't complete it in the time that's allowed under the tolling agreement. The draft EIR was released for the 91 unit townhome development. That continued in the process. And the development agreement that's before you today is analyzed as an alternative in the EIR. One of the key purposes of this council ad hoc was to look at alternatives, a negotiated alternative between the city and the applicant. And the final EIR, which includes formal responses to comments received on the project, was released in May of this year, May 15th. A brief summary of the historic background of this site. As you guys well know, Page and Turnbull prepared a historic resources evaluation as part of the NVCAP, North Ventura Coordinated Area Plan process, to determine the eligibility of the site for the California Register. And that came before the Historic Resources Board to confirm their agreement that it is eligible for the California Register. The Cannery Building and the Ash Building were identified as eligible under Criterion 1 for events. The site is not listed on the city's local register. And the Historic Resources Board held, as I mentioned, the study session in July 2019 regarding that historic resources evaluation. A quick summary on the environmental impact report and the findings of that report. The demolition of a portion of this building was identified as a significant and unavoidable impact on a historic resource. For the proposed project as well, proposed 91 unit project, as well as all build alternatives, including the proposed development agreement before you today. So that does require that council prepare and adopt overriding considerations for the project when it comes before them. Mitigation measures requiring an interpretive display as well as a HABS level 3 documentation is required in the EIR as mitigation measures to reduce impacts. But it was found that no impact would reduce the impact to the demolition of this building to a less than significant level. So it still results in a significant and unavoidable impact for the proposed project and the alternatives. I just want Resources Board comments from the study session. Some of the comments included comments related to the remaining cannery building and its design. board members indicated that the project should try and follow the SOI Secretary of the Interior standards where feasible, and where the project deviates, the applicant should explain why. And so in the applicant's presentation today, they do plan to go through a summary of the changes and some of the changes that they're making and why. There was also a lot of interest, both from the council ad hoc committee as well as from the board members during the study session, to really prioritize the monitor roofs as a key character defining feature to be preserved. There was also a lot of interest in public views and access to the cannery building from Pahrb Boulevard. Some concerns about how the townhomes block views of that. I do want to note that the proposed project, the proposed development agreement, includes a public access easement over the whole connection from Portage to Park. So it opens up that whole connection to the public, as well as creating a public park across from that cannery building. I just wanted to speak to some of the comments that were made about the area under the cannery roofs kind of being the primary focus. And the maps are really a little bit unclear. We have Sanborn maps from 1925 and Sanborn maps from 1945, and then present day visual of the site. And from these visuals, it's unclear what exactly was the original building. The building is made up of a conglomerate of different buildings that were put together over the years. All of the additions were done during the period of significance. And so when we are looking at the project and looking at the building, because they all relate and were done during the period of significance when the cannery was active, they are all important aspects and part of the whole of the site. And so the conclusion of the environmental impact report is that demolition of 40% of this building is a significant and unavoidable impact. And so regardless of whether you retain the building underneath the monitor roofs alone, it would still be identified as a significant and unavoidable impact that would not be consistent with the Secretary of Interior standards. The HRB raised several questions about alternatives to the proposed project, including suggestions that the open space be redesigned and to be located around the remaining cannery building, and also that the applicant consider repurposing as an art center or recreational center, and asking for further consideration of adaptive reuse of the site. And we did include, there were a number of comments from the public along the same line. We do have formal responses in the final EIR as to why certain adaptive reuse, especially for uses other than housing, were not considered and evaluated further. And the EIR does conclude that there really is not a build alternative that would result in anything other than a significant and unavoidable impact. We feel that there's no way to adaptively reuse this site for housing or any other use that would could be done in a manner that's consistent with the Secretary of Interior standards and could retain the integrity of the building. There were also a lot of comments about the interpretive display and public art. The HRB asked to maximize the conveyance of Thomas Funshu's life with respect to themes in the public art and or interpretive display. The applicant has done a lot since that January 12th hearing. We've held preliminary hearings with the Public Art Commission on January 19th, and then again on May 18th. And the applicant has selected an artist, and I'm not going to state the name because I'm probably going to butcher it. But Miss Shin is a highly qualified artist who's done a number of pieces of work for commissioned work for different jurisdictions. This is a piece she did for a transit center in Chicago. And I know the applicant plans to speak a little bit more to that public art component, so I will allow them to do that. There was also interest from board members to have staff analyze further whether the Ash office building would be individually eligible for the California Register. So that additional analysis is included in your packet today. The analysis did conclude that the office building would not be individually eligible for the California Register. The board members also indicated that there may be merit in nominating the remaining cannery to the local register. And there was also interest in whether the site would be eligible as a California historic landmark. We had a constraints analysis prepared by our consultant, Rincon Consultants, to take a look at what whether those would be possible. They indicated that the analysis, evaluation of the site would need to be done following construction so that you could make that nomination and determination based on what's existing at the time of the nomination. And so if there's interest in doing that, we can explore how to include language in the development agreement that would require us to come back and do that evaluation and follow up. The applicant has expressed that they would be amenable to working with the city to include that language in the development agreement if there's interest from the Historic Resources Board and ultimately council's determination that that's what they would like to have. The recommendation before you today is to consider the environmental impact report and mitigation measures and recommend approval of the project, noting that the planned community rezoning, development agreement, comprehensive plan amendment, and subdivision map are not subject to the HRB's purview. So what we are really asking of you guys today is a few different things. So this project is technically not required to come before the HRB per the code because it's not listed as a building, but obviously because it's a historic resource and council has an expressed interest in hearing from the HRB your position on this project and how you can the applicant may be able to respect and integrate certain aspects of the historic character of the site through its public art, through the treatment of the remaining building and other aspects. That's why we have this before you today. And so where we are looking for your comments in particular is around the treatment of the remaining building and working on meeting the findings for architectural review, which architectural review board finding number 2 is preserve, respects, and integrates existing natural features that contribute positively to the site and the historic character, including historic resource of the area when relevant. The key goal of one of the key goals of the council ad hoc was to preserve key historic aspects of the building and to recognize the site's historic significance through the way it's being treated following this development. Recommendations to council regarding evaluation following the completion of construction, as I mentioned, such as if there's interest in having that evaluation done and nominating this to the local register or as a California historic landmark. And then recognizing that the public art falls to the purview of the Public Arts Commission, just any feedback on the current direction that the applicant is going with the public art. And with that, I'll turn it back to you and recommend that you hear from the applicant.
Thank you. That would be great. We would love to have a representative speak with us.
Good morning. My name is Evan Sokolowski with ArchTech. We're the architect on the project. We're really excited to be back here in front of you sharing our project. We took the feedback we got from your board as well as the city staff and ARB, and we're excited with what we have to present to you today. With me presenting will be Matt Davis, our historic consultant with ARG, and Jennifer Easton, who is our art consultant, to share where we are on that step. As well, Tim Steele and Robert Tersini with the Sobrato organization will be available if there are any specific questions. So since we have a short time and a lot of items to get through, I'll try and go through this quick, and Claire did a very good job of highlighting this. As discussed, it was a long process to get where we are today that actually started as far back as 2011, 2012, when Sobrato acquired the property. One of the key elements, there were 5 elements that came out of the ad hoc committee that we feel the project really addresses very well. That's the historic treatment of the cannery building, which we'll discuss today, the townhomes, providing public viewing access to the monitor roof structure, the dedication of the land, giving the city an opportunity for the affordable housing and a significant public park, and the public art, which we think will be a really great part of the project. Don't need to touch on this. Claire described the project quite well. We will be discussing primarily parcel 3, the cannery building, today. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Matt.
Thank you, Evan. Good morning, commissioners. My name is Matthew Davis, and I'm an architectural historian and principal at Architectural Resources Group. Back in mid-2022, the Sobrato organization asked ARG to develop a series of preservation design guidelines that were included in your packet and were specifically focused on the portion of the cannery building that they are planning to retain. Sobrato was aware that because the building is essentially a lightweight industrial warehouse, bringing it up to code would likely be more complicated than if they were working with a sturdier building. And they also understood that, as Claire mentioned, the building had been modified repeatedly over time, as is typical for such a facility. So they wanted us to help them get an understanding of what the parameters were with respect to historic character. Accordingly, some of my ARG colleagues visited the site to observe current conditions, and together we reviewed the HRE report in detail to understand the property's historic significance and extant character-defining features. Based on that review, we then developed a series of guidelines in these 6 categories you see on the slide. So before Evan goes into more detail, I'd like just to highlight some key ways the project has responded to our guidelines. Next slide. So first, with respect to height and bulk, maintaining the building's long linear massing was considered paramount. In particular, this meant that any new construction should remain below the height of the monitor roofs in order to preserve their prominence. Next slide. And speaking of roof forms, maintaining those historic monitor roofs is obviously a central driver of the entire design approach. More broadly, new construction, including new rooftop mechanical, will remain at or below the top of the parapet walls along the north and south elevations. You see here at the upper left and upper middle a photo and section respectively showing the existing condition at the front of the building, which includes a double height projecting mast that sits in front of the monitor roof portion. The new construction at these locations is reflective of this historic condition. Next slide. Excuse me. Much of the existing building is clad in corrugated metal panels. The west end is board formed concrete, which will remain as is. But accordingly, incompatible cladding materials such as wood siding, brick, or ceramic tile were avoided in the new construction. Instead, the historic portions of the building will be reclad in corrugated metal matching the existing, while the new south entries and the nearby parking garage will be clad in a corrugated metal that is different in color and dimension to offset it from the historic. Next slide. At the clear story, windows that need to be replaced will be replaced with windows that are similar in scale, profile, and appearance to the original, and new fenestration throughout is metal with simple surrounds befitting the industrial character of the property. Next slide. New entries and canopies are clearly additive while being kept simple so that they are compatible with and don't distract from the historic portions, or I should say, yeah, the historic portions of the building. And as mentioned, there is an existing precedence for projecting masses at this location. Next slide. And finally, the open character of the interior, which includes exposed roof truss and support columns, is carefully being retained. Next slide. So I'd just like to close by referencing two other efforts we're involved in. These are both in progress. And first, to satisfy the mitigation measure identified in the project DIR, we are completing HABs-like documentation for the property. This will include compiling formal photography, architectural drawings, and a concise historical narrative that summarizes background historical information for the property. I say HAB style because although this won't be formally submitted to the Library of Congress, the documentation is being completed according to the federal program standards. Next slide. We are also in the process of distilling key historical themes and images, either identified in the HRE or collected through our own research at repositories, including History San Jose and the Alviso Library. This content could serve as the focus of the interpretive displays that are being developed for the site. And this effort has also included conducting an oral interview with Thomas Funshu's granddaughter, Gloria Hom, who has provided invaluable photos and supporting information. So with that, I will hand this off to Jennifer to say a bit more about the artists Sobrato has engaged. Thank you.
Good morning, this is Jennifer Easton. I'm the art consultant on the project, and I'm thrilled to introduce our selected artist, Kyung-Mi Shin, for the project. Right now, you're seeing one of her prior pieces. Kyung-Mi's work is very much characterized by a layering of both historic and cultural elements with contemporary materials and thought processes to really create blended ideas and visions about a site and its people and its cultural importance. When we went to select an artist, we really did concentrate on artists who had been looking at immigration experience, Chinese or Asian history in the United States as part of their past practices. And Kyung-Mi was the artist who really rose for both her experience in materials and integration to architectural, as well as her thoughtful community outreach and engagement as far as her art implementation for her public and studio practice. Next slide, please. So here we see one of her studio installations, and you can see from the layering of her work that, next slide please, gives a detail that she really is layering both on the slide on the left, or the image on the left, and was European history, as well as her own contemporary family history with more iconographic Chinese history, really thinking about how those things blend in together in dialogue with one another. So she has already started looking at the history of the site. We met with the Art Commission last Thursday. They were very excited by the selection of the artist. And the considerations of the opportunities for the artwork, some of the sites we're looking at. There was a particular mention of the idea of using mosaic as a really strong opportunity, and it's something we will be exploring. As far as our next steps, excuse me, we will be coming back to the Art Commission in the late summer, pardon me, early fall, with a conceptual design for their review and dialogue as far as a direction for this project. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Getting into the architectural side of it, since we were last in front of you, we did a fair amount of adjustment and refinement to the design in coordination with ARG, one of which was really focusing on the design with the monitor roof as one of the priorities. Also understanding the importance of the interior space and spatial relationships in terms of the historic importance of those structural elements. Also, since you last saw it, we did further refinement of our materials, making sure that the cladding, as Matt referred to, is more of a replacement in kind, matching what was originally there. Another key feature that we took from comments we received is the loading dock condition. We actually adjusted that side of the project to depress the parking and create more of a reference to the loading dock condition, which improves our amenity space, separates the amenity space from the vehicle parking, and really creates that reference back. Jennifer already talked about the artist, which we're really excited about. I actually had a call with her yesterday. So we're really excited about integrating that into the architecture at an early stage. And lastly, this was something important to both all parties involved as well as Sobrato, was the visibility into the monitor roofs while still maintaining a viable R&D office building. So we've increased windows. We've also doubled the size of the skylight views into the monitor roof area. Just very quickly, the area we're talking about today is on the left side, primarily the 340 building. The 380 portage, as Matt references, really going unchanged, which is the board formed concrete structure to the left side of the page. Just giving you a little color, this was the project as you saw it originally when we presented, and through comments we received, made some significant changes that we think has really responded to the historic guidelines and feedback. You can see the elevated entry referencing the loading dock condition. The window treatment has been adjusted significantly with smaller scale broken down panes of glass. The treatment up at the clear story monitor roof area, those windows are replaced in kind, and the form is much more reflective even in the rendering of what will be designed and installed. Switching to the retail side of the building, again, this was what was originally, and with the input and revisions, it's what you see now. As Matt mentioned, on the left side, our two-story element that has the signage is still what is there today in the two-story element that extends all across the south side of the building. The retail piece, which is our one-story additive element, we did this for two reasons. One, to help create identity for the retail, but also to be able to really reinforce that monitor roof form along this side. As it is existing right now, it's really hidden by the two-story element. By transitioning down to a one-story element, it gives us both a very viable identity for retail, but also celebrates and gives additional view into that monitor roof area for the public. This is again a view a little further back that shows the garage panels and the at-grade condition with the revisions to it that include the elevated and depressed, or the depressed parking elevating the entry, a little more variation on the garage, and and the material refinement on the cannery building. Again, view of the amenity space at grade. And then what you see when we depress it, it really creates a much better amenity space and separates the parking from that very nice space between the building. This is looking down basically from the entry. And again, the elevated entry and loading dock condition creates a very nice transition and focus on the building itself. This was one of the key features. One of the key elements was to try and create as much vision into the monitor roof while respecting the need for a retail space that's functional. This was what we showed you originally. And since then, we've come and as you can see on the right, we doubled the square footage, the doubled amount of view that we have into that space. So 2 skylights. Still allowing us to have the space beyond for back of house, depending on what retail tenant comes in. It gives the opportunity for that space to be utilized. Again, you can see the two significantly sized skylights angled, which also kind of are a reference to the sawtooth that would be common back in this time frame. So, and giving you very good views into that wonderful wood truss that we're keeping. Speaking of moving, we added this and further developed it with ARG, understanding the importance of this interior space. Again, all of those wood trusses are existing. We're actually showing a proposed layout of the ductwork that it would go into the space. Again, very respectful of the space and our distribution. A lot of the windows you see, you can still see the smaller openings and the skylights. The windows on the right are actually being replaced in kind again. These were boarded up on the many additions that have occurred over the years, but we're adding those back, which will create a wonderful open space for a future R&D tenant. And the picture on the bottom is the existing condition. Just another view showing the view near the office entry and an access up to our mezzanine. The mezzanine is currently existing and we're maintaining that feature. And one more, this is just a view looking at the opposite end. Again, you have the one-story retail space at the end with the windows you can see above looking out of the Monitor Roof building that you can see from the retail side. Again, creating a nice, very open, replacing the old skylights back in their original location, while still making sure all of these changes and additions are bringing the building up to code, which was one of the critical aspects that we needed to do, as well as respecting the historical nature of the treatment, was life safety, structural, and other code issues need to be brought up to compliance in order to make this a development that could be occupied. And with that, we would like to open it up to questions and look forward to dialogue with you.
Thank you. Do we want to have members of the public speak before we ask our questions? Why don't we do that? So do we have public speakers on this item?
Yes. So first one, we have a group by Karen Holman, who's speaking on behalf of her, Hamilton, Winter, Jerry, and Pat.
Do we have last names for those people?
Let's
We need to
see.
get all the names of the people you're speaking for.
Okay, can I give that to you
We can do
afterwards?
that
Okay, all right, great. Thank you very much. Good morning. You have a difficult job in front of you, Samantha. Welcome. This is your first formal meeting, I believe, as an HRB member. I have comments also that Monica Arima, who cannot be here, has submitted. She says that they've lived in Professorville at 1052 Bryant. They completely rebuilt their historic house more than 20 plus years ago. She's been here since 1991 and her husband since 1960s. I volunteer and support historic programs at Stanford University, included but not limited to the Chinese Railroad Workers History Project. I love preserving history any way we can because history teaches us empathy and tolerance. History gives us the opportunity to learn about others' past mistakes. It helps us understand the many reasons why people may behave the way they do. As a result, it helps us become more impartial as decision makers. With the growth of the Chinese population in town, it's important to include the Chinese American history in town as much as we can to establish roots so that many of them can feel at home and accepted. The current design of the project destroys a big portion of the cannery, the historic cannery. CEQA requires to maintain this structure as an historic site. And if not, I think we should prohibit the project to move forward until the structure is preserved to qualify it as an historic site in the future. We only have one chance to do it right. I urge the board to support the preservation of the Cannery Historic Site. And thank you for your consideration. And those, again, comments were from Monica Arima, who could not be here. And now for me speaking for the others here. What's proposed to happen to the Cannery building is a nearly 40% demolition, as you know, of the California Register eligible resource. And I focus on the word resource because I want you all to consider what we want and ought to do with any of our resources. Is it to demolish, obliterate, remove, disregard? The noted architect critic said that it is not the landmarks that we will be, the noted architectural critic, Louise Huxtable, said, we will probably not be judged by the monuments we build, but by those we have destroyed. I suggest to you that this building and site is a monument to the accomplishment of Thomas Foon Chu, a Chinese man who was honored by 25,000 people, including elected officials when he died. That was in the 30s, which makes his accomplishments even more remarkable. Going to the FEIR, the final EIR, of course, not every possible alternative can be considered to eliminate a significant impact, but a feasible one must be evaluated. I don't see that one has in terms of retention of at least enough of the cannery building to retain its historic character. While the development agreement proposes 75 housing units, the city burdens the cannery building with 281 units. Why not 91 is in the original proposal or the 75 in the development agreement? I don't understand that. The city will have to make a statement of overriding considerations to find the adequacy of the FEIR. In no other response is this more infeasible because the applicant's own architect was asked to conceive of an adaptive reuse of the cannery building, again imposing 281 units. Numerous times at the NVCAP meetings, there were requests for the city to conduct a feasibility study, presumably independent, for reuse of the building. There is no evidence known to this speaker that that has ever occurred. One of the project objectives is to develop cohesive development that respects the historic uses at the site. I suggest this does not. It demolishes the history of the site. I'm baffled by one of the comments that I submitted is that there could be a regional cumulative impact with the removal of this building and this site as an historic resource. The building is this is from the Page and Turnbull report. The building is a rare surviving example of Palo Alto's and Santa Clara County's agricultural past. And yet the response in the FEIR is that the Valley of Heart's Delight is not a designated historic district, and the project area is not within an historic district. Overall, the project involves impacts to individual historic resources. There will be no significant cumulative impact to similar historic resources in the region. I am baffled by that response, truly baffled. Again, in the Page and Turnbull report, what qualifies as a California Register eligible property? The first, only, last, or most significant of its type in the state or within the large geographical area, or associated with an individual or group having profound influence on the history of California. Those, to me, are statements of why this is a regional impact, not just a local impact. In comments having to do with adding the street directly in front of I call it the remnant building, adding a housing project that is yet to be designed or developed, a housing project directly in front of the remnant building. The responses came, analysis unnecessary due to the significant impact that's already going to be happening on the cannery building. It's important because whether or not the cannery is saved, as we advocate, the remnant building will be compromised for listing locally due to impacts. In response to the proximity of the proposed townhomes, the mass scale location of the affordable housing project near the historic building. Again, I ask how that is being analyzed as to impact on the remnant building even. Again, the response, the proposed demolition would result in a substantial impact resulting in a substantial, significant and unavoidable impact. Analysis of whether the other elements of the project align with the Secretary of the Interior standards is unnecessary because their conformance to the standards would be rendered inapplicable due to the material impairment of the historic resource. But if we're talking about, we would like to save as much of the whole cannery building as possible. But if we're talking about only the remnant, I call it, building, these are significant impacts, I believe, to that remnant building, but yet they are being dismissed as not relevant. At the August 1st, 2022 council presentation, there were slides introduced that presented the project to the community for the first time. One of the slides said that the remnant building would be subject to the Secretary of Interior standards. Yet at an ARB meeting, it was asked of the ARB, because the building is losing its historic integrity, should this remnant building be subject to the Secretary standards? Couple of things I have issue with that is, one is the ARB is not the Historic Resources Board, but they did weigh in very emphatically. They thought this was an important building. But the other is, was this not a promise? I viewed the slides on August 1st, 2022, as a promise to the community that the Secretary standards would be applied to the remnant building. I look at the slides that were presented today. I don't see them applied. The other thing I would comment about the Secretary of Standards being applied to the remnant building, there's a lot of reference to replacing in kind, replacing in kind. How many times did I hear that? What about repair, restore? Replacing in kind is a last alternative, and it's one that should be employed if necessary. But was consideration given to repair, restore? I have no idea. Regarding the PC zoning response, I asked what stipulations would be made in the PC zoning, because 4 of these parcels are going to be zoned PC. And the response was they'll satisfy the PC ordinance, which is the general overall PC ordinance that established the ability to have PCs in Palo Alto. But there's no reference to, say, for instance, any of these buildings. Let's just say the remnant building, the townhomes, the apartment building, the affordable housing building in front. None of them have any strictures put on them about compatibility with the remnant building or what their impact is going to be. Why this is important is because there are no standards, no development standards or requirements in a PC. The development agreement, even if some of these comments were made in a development agreement, so the remnant building has to satisfy the Secretary's standards, the street in front needs to be narrowed to or moved further away. The development agreement expires. It's only got a 10-year lifespan. So what happens at the end of 10 years? What happens in 15 years when we're all gone, off doing other things, and there's not the focus on this site? What can happen? The PC zones that are being applied to these various parcels need to have stipulations in them that live on, that protect the resource and consider the environment. The reason these impacts, and I know you all know this, the reason these impacts the design of the townhomes adjacent to the affordable housing project in front, the street cutting through in front, why those are important, you know the term, area of potential effect. That's why they're important. And in the future, let's just say there are proposed changes to the townhomes that pretty much abut the remnant building. Those projects will not come to you. They likely will not come to you. You will have no say in that. It's great that the staff has chosen to bring this to you, and I appreciate that very much, because it isn't a requirement, absolutely, but I appreciate that very much. But think in the future. Think in the future. So these PC zones, it is critical that they include, I have my own thoughts about PCs and whether they should be there or not, but if they're going to be there, they need to have stipulations that protect what we can protect and save. I'm a little bit timid about saying this, but I will. The view of this, me being shy, right? But the view of the structural system through a hole in the ceiling of the retail space, to me, it's like, to get the effect of that and the influence of that, you need to actually be in it, see it in a larger scale. To me, that is sort of like viewing the world through a hole in the fence. It's just not the effect that you get if you're actually experiencing it. We talk a lot about displacement these days, and for good reason. We want to make sure we are not displacing people or peoples who have long been someplace for the sake of adding more and new opportunities. I suggest to you that we are replacing our culture, our legacies, our important histories as a community and beyond when we erase the past, the very significant past that exists on this site. I asked the HRB to exercise the charter that is your charge regarding historic preservation. Make your opinion known and clear to the council and to the ARB and to the staff, what you think about this process, this project. And of course, you will probably have to comment on what is before you as is proposed, but that does not deter you from making comments about what you think should happen here, what ought to happen here, what could happen here. What is before you is an opportunity to take a stand by standing for a man who cannot stand for himself, but who leaves a legacy. That is in your hands, and that of Sobrato and the city. We are all volunteers. We mean no disrespect, and we believe there is a better way to accomplish the goals of the development agreement and Sobrato's goals while also respecting our history by giving it its rightful place in the future. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you. Do we have other speakers?
Yes, next is Jeff Levinsky.
Good morning, board members and staff. Thank you for tackling this item. First, I'd like to underscore what many others are saying, namely that the cannery and office on Ash are extraordinary in terms of their significance to Palo Alto and the greater region. As the analysis prepared by Page and Turnbull indicates, demolishing almost 40% of the cannery will be catastrophic and defeats the whole notion of historic preservation of the site. There's a perception that the city has no choice, that you have no choice, perhaps due to the threat of a lawsuit from the property owner or new state laws. I asked about this in the questions for the EIR, and the answers on pages 67 and such indicate that the city does have choices. One reason is that the proposed mix of uses do not comply with our zoning laws, which at this point allow for no office or R&D use whatsoever on the site without a lot of retail as well. If a proposed use is not legal or discretionary, the city does not have to agree to it at all. The proposal does also not comply with our comprehensive plan. The FER's response to my questions claimed the comprehensive plan doesn't apply to this project, but I've spoken to local experts who helped write that plan, and they emphasize that our comprehensive plan policies about preservation, adaptive reuse, and encouraging financial strategies to help fund those absolutely do apply to this project. The project before you does not comply with those policies. So that's another reason to turn it down. Here's one more reason. We haven't truly looked at creative ways to preserve the entire cannery. I suggested one approach on page 64 of the FEIR. Instead of building a new parking structure north of the cannery, put the cars in the 40% of the cannery that was to be demolished. Where the new parking structure was to be built, put more condominiums to make up for the ones that would have been atop the demolished portion. So you end up with lots of condominiums, parking, and the cannery building completely remains. The FEIR dismissed this in one sentence saying, quote, modifying the cannery building to convert it to a parking use could not be done without modifying the character defining features of the building, end of quote. Really? Only part of the building would be for parking. You would need just one opening on the north side large enough for cars to drive through, which quite possibly exists already or once did. The current doors and windows would not need to change at all, neither would the roof line. So we would very much preserve the existing building and yet allow for condominiums. But please don't stop there. Please look at how other cities have preserved buildings like this and encourage the ARB, the PTC, and the City Council to as well. We have an incredible, one-of-a-kind, amazing piece of history right in our backyard. Let's not bulldoze it. Thank you.
Next is Lotus Yifong.
Hi, I'm a recently relocated grandmother from San Francisco, but I've been coming back and forth since my high school graduating grandson 18 years ago. But I'm originally from Albuquerque, New Mexico. And after school, I would go to the Albuquerque Public Library, which beautiful Spanish adobe architecture, only 3 short blocks across the railroad tracks. Ding Ding, Stanford Railroad. And I remember when they demolished the gorgeous Santa Fe Railroad station in Albuquerque to put up a nice new modern building. And I would like to give some more historical context and comparables to the kind of historic argument that we're trying to make that there are better alternatives. When that same grandson was in the 4th grade here, he came home dressed like an Irish gold miner. And I looked at his social studies book, and there was the one sentence. So 8 years ago, I started doing the railroad history. I worked with Monica, and we succeeded in celebrating the 150th sesquicentennial in Salt Lake City Promontory a few years ago. And we're continuing with that history because that building has the potential to contribute to the whole California history, and specifically Palo Alto and the Bay Area, because the railroad opened up the West, not only to those who rode it from the East Coast, right, but the rest of the world. So we're looking forward to next year's renovation of the Cantor Museum room with the Stanford mural, I call it the chapel, that does not actually objectively tell the history of how Stanford was part of the, they call it hot old. So when we include the role of the Irish and Chinese railroad workers to actually do the labor it took to make the railroad happen, I'd like to credit Native American Floyd Red Crow Westerman. You have seen him in movies and TV acts. He's passed away, but his passion before leaving this earth for the great spirits was to say, we don't need happy history, we need real history. And so very recently, there's a new book, a bit, as the Brits would say, controversy, controversial, that Malcolm Harris, the graduate of Poly High School, did, called Palo Alto, A History of California, Capitalism, and the World. So in the context of Palo Alto and the county of Santa Clara and the whole Bay Area, we have a very active Chinese historical cultural project in San Jose. They're working on what used to be the Fairmont, right, which has a tiny little plaque that nobody sees on the side of the hotel building, which has changed ownership. So they're putting another memorial in what will be called Heinleinville Park in San Jose, Japantown. So in telling that the real history, the deliberate fires and burning outs that drove Chinese out of California, right, resulted in very good, compassionate humanitarian. Mr. Heinlein made land available for the Chinese to rebuild their community. And that's another story that can be told over and over again, not just in the United States, but in other parts of the world. So we could have a space because of the unique history of Stanford, the gold railroads, levees, agriculture, everything else, to use all the Chinese visitors, well, everybody who visits Stanford, okay, and the population we have, we could really pass on some of this real history. So the timing is, Thomas Foon Chu was a late contemporary of another cannery in Oakland.
Excuse me, I hate to interrupt, but we're way over your time. And so if you could wrap up, that would be great.
I'm just saying the timing is now that more history is coming out. This building would be an incredibly valuable resource, and we could get the resources to get more land and more housing.
Thank you.
Excuse me, would you mind having, stating the name for the record? Oh, she left already. If you could just state and spell your name for the record.
I wrote it on the slip of paper, Lotusyee. Chinese women don't change their last names. And then I added my, marital FONG.
Thank you.
And next is Becky Sanders.
Give me a second to adjust my mic here. All right, get my glasses on. Good morning, board members. Thank you for hearing this item today. My name is Becky Saunders, spelled Sanders. I live in Ventura. The cannery is a few blocks from my home, and I have been active in the movement to explore adaptive reuse of the cannery to preserve it. I am opposed to demolishing any part of the building, which, as you know, would ruin its qualification as a historic site. I understand that the board makes recommendations concerning Palo Alto's diverse heritage. Several Venturans were part of the North Ventura Coordinated Area Plan Working Group. There was considerable interest in adaptive reuse of the building, and the group brought forward several scenarios for retention and reuse of the building, all of which were sadly never seriously entertained. What's before us today isn't what people in the community were working toward. In addition to coming up with its own scenarios, the NVCAP working group repeatedly asked the city to commission an independent feasibility study of adaptive reuse of the cannery, but their requests went repeatedly unanswered. I bring all this up to point out that any models for retaining the cannery building in full have never been explored. I was shocked and saddened to realize that the independent architect featured in the FEIR to weigh in on retention of the building is in fact the applicant's own architect and not one retained by the city. The work of the applicant and the city staff has been commingled, making it difficult for us to distinguish discrete boundaries between the two. Is this the city or the applicant talking? Sometimes I'm not sure. An independent assessment would help separate the two. It so happens that I am also the co-author of a letter to this body from Palo Alto neighborhoods. The letter was not included in the packet, which was most troubling, but I've been assured it was circulated to you. The preservation of the cannery is of citywide concern, which is why PAN membership voted to send the letter. We submit that the cannery is as important to the history of agriculture here in the Valley of the Heart's Delight as did David and Lucille's Packard's garage is to the history of Silicon Valley. It is my understanding that you have discretion and power, that you have the authority to advise as you see fit here. Rather than supporting demolition, please request an independent feasibility study for protecting the cannery and its rich history. Sidestepping the requested study and demolishing over a third of the building, stripping it of its status and putting up a plaque is not going to cut the mustard here. Or as the site was famous for, it's not going to can the asparagus. So please give due consideration to the cannery's significance and afford to it the protection and respect the Thomas Foon Chew Canny Empire deserves. And I also just want to align myself with something we just heard. History is happening now. We are uncovering and unearthing new ways of approaching and dealing with our troubled, confusing, passionate, beautiful history. We have this huge building right here for our use and preservation. So I'm super excited that this could be part of a next page in Palo Alto's history. Thank you so much for your service. I really appreciate your taking up this difficult topic.
And last is Eugen Lockhart.
Hello, everybody. My name is Eugen Lockhart, Yugen Lockhart, and I live at 405 Olive Avenue. And I noticed my brother's house next door at 411 Olive Avenue is the sole house on the undeveloped property along behind Olive's cannery. I've been here for myself 45 years. I was born in that house that I'm in now, literally in the house. And my backyard faces the lovely air conditioners on the top of the at Topic building, which are not the most beautiful. I think we had some great speakers here. I think they gave a lot of good sentiments to the history of this structure. At the same time, a lot of the structure that we're trying to preserve is pretty ugly. I do like the monitor roof aspect and keeping that. I think it's interesting how nebulous the documentation is and what part is historical, what was made originally, what was made additionally. And I think we're trying to save a lot of the additional stuff. I don't know who or how the original studies have taken place to qualify the percentage of what we need to keep. It seems like if it's so nebulous and undefined, maybe they can reassess it. I don't know that, but if they could, maybe we can reduce it to a quantity that you can maintain the historical aspect and yet still allow us to chop off some of the ugly extensions that about keeping a lot of what is there. And we're trying to maintain as historical when, in my opinion, personal opinion, is maybe not that necessary to keep all of it. Definitely, I do agree we should keep some of it, including the monitor buildings, including the old house on Portage. I think it's Portage. Anyways, so those are some aspects of my personal opinion. Is I would like to see this neighborhood develop cohesively. We had an NVCAP stuff going on, and that was a good start, but even they seem to be undershooting and not really coming up with a nice plan for our neighborhood. As individuals along Olive for sure, and a bit of Pepper as well, we're getting inundated with all of these projects, all the low-income projects, all of the medium-income projects. It's just, we're, I don't know, 25 houses or something like that, and we're getting an additional 2,000 or 3,000 residents moving into our 2 or 3 block radius. That's a lot of people. And so whether you guys chop all this building, half the building, or keep it all, it's up to you guys. But just know that we're feeling frustrated that we're just getting overwhelmed by large quantities of people and businesses, whatever. We don't all mind the industrial aspects behind us. The street sweeping at 9 p.m. is a little annoying, but other than that, and having a parking lot looming behind us, not the greatest, but it's as long as the architects are respectful for that. We understand that things are going to change in our neighborhood. I maintain 6 of the little bungalow houses. They're all falling apart. So I need to think about my own plans too, of how to keep them either standing or what I'm going to do with them. It's not an easy task. And so I know this old building behind us is in the same state. It's a rickety old shed. I don't mind personally if they put new cladding on the side of it, if it matches what's currently there. That seems acceptable so that it can actually be a habitable structure.
Thank you. Can you wrap up?
So that's kind of my general opinion. I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Chair Willis, I needed to make take a pause for just a moment. We have a board member who has submitted a just cause exemption for today's meeting, and wondered if the board would, the state law apparently on this topic of remote participation for just cause requires that the board take a vote that they can allow the member to participate for the just cause. I don't think I have to I don't think I have to say what the just cause is, but Mike is a caretaker. And so I'll just leave it at that. And then if you can, by voice vote, enable him to participate, we can proceed. This would be his 4th just cause meeting and his last.
Thank you, Amy. Does anybody object if we vote this way? Thank you. So all in favor, can we just do a voice vote? I think so too. So all in favor, aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
And the motion carries unanimously. And thank you, Mike. Thanks for joining us. So let's move into board member questions. Margaret, you want to start or?
I don't necessarily have any questions.
Okay. Do we have questions? Go.
since I'm fairly new to the board, I really haven't followed this project since its inception. I wanted to know what kind of adaptive reuse studies were there?
So I can't speak to the full NV cap that I think that some of the speakers were speaking to, but for the project before you today, there were two build alternatives that were analyzed in the environmental impact report, as well as the proposed 91 unit townhome development. So three total development project and alternatives. So the 91 unit townhome development included 91 units in the area of the 74 units before you today, as well as the full public park and affordable housing area city dedication land. There was also an alternative studied in the EIR, which aligned with the NVCAP looked at a much larger area than just this site. So we kind of took the preferred alternative that council was looking at and looked at what that would mean for this site, and looked at an adaptive reuse of a 3-story alternative. And then it included a small townhome development in the area of the public park as well. And what we asked the applicant to provide as part of the final EIR in response to some of the comments was to show what it would look like if they were looking at a single-story alternative as well. And what they showed, made it clear that any alternative that you're looking at for adaptive reuse of the site for housing is going to require significant changes to the building to provide proper light and air for fire safety, building code upgrades, green building code compliance, and that any adaptive reuse of the site for housing is going to result in impacts that would likely be significant and unavoidable. So, the CEQA does not require you to look at every feasible alternative, nor does it require you to, complete a complete plan set for every alternative that's being explored for the project. So those are what were reviewed. We did not look at alternatives that did not include housing because they don't meet most of the basic project objectives.
My question is, there was mention of doing a HABS-like survey, but why not submit it to the state? And also, I think this applies to the recent San Antonio one too. Why don't they get submitted to the state?
And actually, can I piggyback a question on that? Which is, where is that HAB style survey information going to end up? Like what's the repository for that information?
And I had a third question on that as well. Why won't it be submitted to the Library of Congress if it's following the HABs like detailing? Why wouldn't it be submitted?
We do have Julianne Murphy, the city's historic consultant, online. Perhaps she might be able to speak to that. She should be. Julianne? Julianne? Oh, sorry.
Yes, I'm here. Sorry, I was updating. Yeah, I'm Julianne Murphy. I'm the historic consultant from Rincon Consultants that was hired by the city and worked on the EIR, and we developed the EIR mitigations. And we recommended a HABS like documentation. There is considerable cost and effort with preparing a submission that gets submitted to the Library of Congress, that oftentimes the the burden on the applicant is difficult to overcome, and we find is most applicable to the local communities. And so making those materials available locally to the local library and to historic organizations is often seen as more meaningful than those that are submitted to the Library of Congress. Also, Library of Congress submissions require an intense amount of detail as far as the preparation and creation of measured drawings in addition to photographs. So we have found that a HABS-like documentation is more meaningful for the local community than something that meets the requirements of the Library of Congress submission.
Thank you. Does that answer our question? Sort of. Okay. Thank you. So do we want to move into comments or do we have other questions?
I have questions.
Okay.
First, I need to divulge something. In early March of this year, I'll put it in my mouth and see if that works better. So in early March, I asked Doria Suma to introduce me to Tim Steele at Sobrato Corporation. I know she met him and worked with him in the NVCAP process. She did that, and we were able to go to Sobrato on March 27th, both Doria and I. And Tim did meet with us along with Robert Tersini. They were very generous with their time. My objective in meeting with them was to ask them that if this project was approved largely as they are proposing it, that there be a much more intensive documentation of this site than even a HABS-like one as just described to us, which to me is completely inadequate. And I really think this documentation goes well beyond being meaningful for the local community for all the reasons that we've heard today. I think this story, to be frank about it, and I hope I don't offend anybody, this site and this story are more important than any Birch Clark building in this town, as far as I can see, and particularly in the context of what's happening to now in history. So, and the reemergence of history. So I was asking them specifically to consider new and emerging and being applied and current techniques and technologies that are all coming from the building industry itself to make a much more comprehensive documentation of this building. I would prefer in its entirety as it stands now, but at a minimum of the part that's going to be torn down. And that would include using as-built photography techniques as demolished or as deconstructed documentation, and also doing the measures, which we've just been told was an onerous and too expensive process, by applying LiDAR technology, which is readily available today, and will measure these entire spaces inside and out at a high level of accuracy. Now, I also need to divulge that I was given the report for a separate project, 788 San Antonio Road. I requested that this HABS-like work product be distributed to this board in advance of this meeting. Unfortunately, that did not happen. But this is a blueprint and a precedent for what I'm trying to describe, I believe. Now, this site, which was the California Chrysanthemum Growers Association headquarters built in the early 50s, that association is a mutual benefit business group of Japanese American immigrants started in the 20s. This project, on the San Antonio project as a site, mirrors the Fry site, the Chu site, in many, many ways. It's almost parallel to it, but on a much smaller scale. It involves an underrepresented history and community, a community that, like the Chinese American community and immigrants, was discriminated against In practice and in law, the Exclusion Act, the Japanese Exclusion Act of the 20s, look at the Chinese Exclusion Acts, they banded together and built an industry which was significant to the entire Bay Area. They were entrepreneurial, like Mr. Chu. They found ways to address the discrimination against them. For example, the inability of their immigrant parents to purchase land to grow these products that are farming products, cultivation products. It's very similar to the cannery. And they had to put in order to do that, and they eventually did it, they had to put the names in the title of their American-born children, for example. They also got together so they could buy and deal with the American and the local business community in a way that was fair by sourcing things at scale. Now this, I don't know why, I was pointed to a planner to ask questions about why this decision was made to include the use of laser measurements. That's a first as far as I know from anything we've seen. And I have those drawings here. They look like drawings. There are the inside, the outside, the top and the bottom. They're not drawings. They were all done by laser scans and rendered from that. And I was urging the notion of if this building needs to lose its integrity, its qualifications. By the way, the one on San Antonio was also California Register eligible, but not listed. I mean, the parallels between these two are just immensely interesting to me. So why couldn't we, for example, go beyond as found photography and measures which were not defined by the architectural consultant here in any detail at all. In the original Habs world, it was done with tape measures, pencils, and paper. When we can create point clouds of this entire structure so that if and when its integrity is destroyed and 40% of it is demolished, from this point forward, if that data is protected and made appropriately available to all users, it could be used to create an interactive, interpretive display, for example, of what this building was like, how massive, its features, all those details already exist, just like the rich historic narrative that already exists. I would also submit that this site and its history is potentially of national interest, as was described today by one of our speakers, and that education, particularly in Palo Alto, there should be some curriculum around this. When I grew up in the Palo Alto schools, we heard all about all kinds of things. Farther Sierra, Bill and Dave and Packard. I never heard a word about this. I was in this building multiple times with my father when I was a boy. What is it, MaxSmart? I had no idea what it was or where it came from and why it was built and the man that was responsible for what he did there. And I would submit that beyond Habs-like documentation, using Habs as a guideline is a really good idea, that if you want younger generations, digital natives to be interested in any of this documentation, the way it's being proposed here, at least as I understand it at this point, will not be particularly interesting, even if it is available at the public library. However, if that data is generated and simple works are created out of it in the near term, but it is made available to the creative community and the historic community, someone might be able to build a virtual tour of that, which would be far more interesting to those audiences. And that's what I'm worried about, is that we'll get the plaque, we'll get this, we'll get that, but in 20 years, nobody will really know. And I think the public artwork is great. I think the artist that's been selected is great, but I think we ought to think ahead to audiences in Palo Alto and in California and beyond who are not part of my generation and consume information and data and concepts in a much different way than I did when I grew up. And I just point you to TikTok and I end my comments in that regard. I would like to have the applicant or their consultants to speak more specifically about what appears in here, because my request did wind up in this document. It wound up in the matrix in the staff report. It says, documentation prior to demolition, at least one board member, that would be me, noted that the proper documentation of the existing building is a critical part of it being done before it's demolished. And it says that the applicant is considering doing this and looking at these technologies. And I would like to understand more about how that is going to work, that process of consideration. And I think that should come back to us at some point if that is serious work that's taking place now. That process of consideration and looking into it should be more or less completed or at least outlined before a decision is made about it.
Do you want the applicant to address that?
Yes, I would.
Do we have somebody from Sobranto who can address that?
Yes, I believe so. And if I could, just before they speak, I do want to kind of explain that if that is of the interest of the board, then as part of your recommendations to council, you can ask for additional things that you think should be included as part of the project. They would be, to the extent that it's agreed upon and moves forward, then it would go before the council as part of the wording of the development agreement that, any additional specific things that they ask for that they're agreeing to, council in their discretion can, reinforce the recommendation of what they would like to see.
Well, that's all well and good, but I still don't understand. This is in the staff report. Exactly what I'm talking about. You did not mention it in your presentation, and it did not come up in the architect's presentation. It was left out entirely in what you presented to us today. So that's fine, and I'm sure some of us will do that, perhaps as individuals, if not as a board. But I would like this to be discussed today.
Claire, would you like me to respond?
Yes.
Yes.
So I will. So thank you, Commissioner P. So since you met with Tim and Robert back in March, they've been in touch with me, and we've been discussing different alternative ways of capturing data regarding the building in a digital format. We've been kicking around some possibilities based on things we've been involved in with other historic properties, either directly ARG or through engaging an expert sub-consultant. I will say that to those of you who may be familiar with Matterport, that's the technology that's used on a lot of realty websites now to do the virtual tours of a given piece of property. There is a Matterport model for part of this building already that addresses exactly the types of virtual tour capabilities that Commissioner Peace is describing. So I think one option would be to just expand that model to encapsulate the whole building, but there are also other more technical options as well, which we are in the process of discussing with Sobranto.
So how long do you think that process?
The initial priority is to conform or to satisfy the requirements of the EIR. And so the HABs documentation necessarily takes precedence, but the digital documentation, once a pathway is agreed upon, it's not a time-consuming process. I mean, it's a matter of getting whatever 360-degree cameras you need out on site, and it's a day or two or three of documentation, and much of the time after that is just spent on processing the data that's been collected. So it doesn't take a long time.
Would you entertain people Would you entertain conversations with experts on the current state of this? Matterport is one of the early players in this space, but there are a number of others. They have very different capabilities in terms of the resolution. There are all sorts of interesting things happening in your industry about standards in this regard. And it seems to me that if you're going to have that exploration, it would be useful to reach out beyond your own firm's expertise and to assume that what you have is the best available technology and method for capturing this at the highest rate of highest level of resolution that's available today.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, it is. And you hit the nail on the head that one of the trickiest aspects in this corner of the field is that the technology is always changing and advancing. And so you really have to stay in the loop.
How might that work? How would you engage a larger, how would you determine whether what you have is adequate or the best level available?
Well, I mean, I think we're taking too much time on this issue, to be frank. We've engaged consultants in the past on very complex digital documentation undertakings at very high profile historic properties. So, I mean, I think there are some other things we need to focus on today, but, I will be in touch with Tim and Robert and, in whatever way it's appropriate with you directly to make sure that we're headed in the right direction. But yeah, we're not ingenues when it comes to this aspect of documentation.
Well, being frank about it, I don't think it is too much detail. We're talking about taking this building down, essentially. Even if it's not listed, it will not be eligible according to everything that's been said today. So it seems to me that it's an important aspect of this discussion.
Christian, I think we all think it's an important aspect, but I do think that we're more in the weeds than we need to be right now. So we need to make a recommendation to council. I think we can incorporate what we're talking about now in our recommendations, but let's sort of broaden out our scope here a little and see what other aspects of the project we want to bring forward to council.
I would be interested in seeing the post-construction evaluation put into the development agreement like was proposed earlier in the presentation. I think it is important to evaluate the building post-construction for local listing or California landmark status.
One of the points that several of the speakers raised today was that it does not appear that the independent analysis of the adaptive reuse was done by a third-party uninterested architect. And please correct me if I'm not getting that, but it sounds like the Sobrato architect evaluated the structure for adaptive reuse and found that for residential, it would need considerable revisions that would make it ineligible for historic register listing.
No, that's not the case. Okay. The applicant, we asked the applicant to prepare a visual of realistically what a single story might look like to get a sense of what kind of changes might need to occur. The city prepared the environmental impact report and the analysis with an independent contractor, Rincon Consultants, to evaluate adaptive reuse of the site.
And Rincon is in no way affiliated with Sobrato.
In no way. The city receives payment from Sobrato and hires independently a third-party contractor.
Thank you.
Do we have other comments from the board? Well, I do have some. I want to first say thank you to Soprano. We all know we need housing, and hallelujah, we'll be getting some. I wish it was a little more responsive. Okay, I wish it was responsive to the site in some way rather than looking like it was cut out of a different set of plans, but it'll be good to have housing. I also think that the parkland is going to be a lovely addition, especially in that part of town where it's really missing. And agreeing to do the documentation was a big favor for us, and we will really appreciate it. I also like a lot of the changes that happened on the plans. I think the window adjustment, getting rid of those angled windows, which were, to me, a huge distraction from the historic. I think that was a great change. And I love the way the back of the building reads now, which I'm referring to the parking garage side of it. I wish that the additions on the front of the monitor roof portion of the building were not so prominent, they do read as modern. They do not read as original to any stage of the building, of which there were very many. But, looking at it, it's the one-story part does not really bother me so much. I wish there would, if in the future there is some way to adjust the two-story section, I find it very distracting. I think that we have to acknowledge that our initial historic analysis looked at the whole building, which is a composite of buildings. But I strongly support doing a new historic evaluation after the demolition. To me, I think the monitor roof portion of the building, which I was really disappointed I could not figure out exactly when it was built, did not look like it was there on the 1925 survey, but it was definitely there in 1940, before the 1945 survey. But to me, it happened within the period of significance. It's the strongest visual symbol of the cannery. I can't imagine it wouldn't be eligible for the National Register. I think it provides a very strong symbolic image of what was there, although I personally would like it if we could sort of mark the boundaries of the original cannery building. I think that it would be a very interesting graphic just to be able to see the extent to which it did grow. I think, we're going to get housing, and I don't really see demanding that the whole building, or expecting that the whole building or composite of buildings stand is really worth, dying on the sword for. To me, I think if we could have one strong historic element, which was obviously a pretty unique, separate entity, although it was added on to, the old structures. I think it would be a fitting token to in addition to Palo Alto. So can we put together a motion of our recommendations to council? I think I have a couple that we all agree on: documentation, that would be Habs-like, that would be the entire building, to me, the part, and I think we need to talk about this in a retreat, the park is having it accessible. So how do you find that information? We have it, and if we put it in the historic files, I'm starting to think maybe we need, as a group, to sort of focus more on historic files as a resource, because, the fact that we've been waiting for that museum building to house them for such a long time is not serving us well. Okay, wait, distracted. Sorry, documentation. The second one I've heard is, it's mine mostly, but I've felt like Alyssa was backing me up on the monitor roof building. Okay, never mind. Two things. I would like to focus on the monitor roof building portion being added to the National Register after the demolition, and also the post-construction analysis or the post-construction documentation being done. So what else would we ask of Sobranto? I don't like this thumbs up, thumbs down. As a historic commission, it's hard to support this, but I think we can. I think we can support portions of how they're treating the historic building, and I think we can support some requests. Anybody want to come up with a motion for council recommendations?
I think this is a very interesting opportunity that we have as a council, considering it did not have to be brought before us. I think it's a really tough issue, but it does signify an option for partnership with the developers in the area. I think they've acted in good faith to preserve the integrity of the part of the building. Of course, I'm not happy with the demolition of the other 40%, but if as a historical resources board, we have to decide if we are preserving the building itself or the history of the community that it represents. And I think there's an opportunity with the status applications after the development to recognize the story of the Thomas Chew and the cannery and pay homage to that, because adding resources to the state register, the national register, does not have any interpretation or interpretive benefit. It simply adds them so that they're protected. With this, we have an opportunity to tell that story within the community and actually make that story known. If the building is preserved as it is and added to the register, it will go on in perpetuity being not a community landmark and not really having an effective use. So I don't love the proposition, but I think there are some opportunities.
Yeah, and I would like to agree with Samantha on that. The spirit of keeping the historic recognition of the site as what had occurred there, because I mean, obviously we've looked at this project before. We've talked at length about the existing buildings and trying to define what the character defining features are that lends it to being a historic site. I think, I mean, and I also wanted to respect the group of people that's here, Karen and the people that spoke today. It is a difficult project in that sense, because our whole spirit of being a board and being here is to preserve anything historic in our city. And when we're presented with a project that, I don't know, there's such a gray area. And I guess I listen to her, I listen to what everyone says, and I want to say that I appreciate all the things that you represent and how you feel. But as a board, we're sort of put, it's like between a rock and a hard place, because we are asked by staff to pass this project, and even knowing that it didn't necessarily technically had to come to us, we respect the fact that it was brought to us, because I think it gives us feeling like we are able to contribute at least our thoughts. But it is hard. I guess my thought is that, Karen talked about the process, and I think that the process is troubled. The historic process and how we review things, how we classify things as historic, it is troubled because our ordinance is not tight enough. Our ordinance is not protective enough. And I think that's something that we struggle with on each project that we review. And just the fact that, what Claire said, she said that, when she was describing where we're at right now, she says significant and unavoidable impact. I mean, there will be significant and unavoidable impact to the historic resource with this project. So I guess I just always rely on our our historic consultants and staff. And I feel like when a project gets to this level and gets to a point where we're asked to comment and, potentially approve the project, it's such an 11th hour moment. And to have people still struggling with, you guys should not approve it because it doesn't follow the ordinance. Well, if it doesn't follow the ordinance, then the ordinance is broken. I think we have to start at more of a grassroots. And also, it really takes a city, it takes an owner of the property, Sobrato, to want to, I just think of the owner and the project itself. They're trying to be respectful of the historic nature of the site. However, it's development rights, and it's the need for housing. And so they're trying to check all these boxes and satisfy what the city will allow them to do, and really what eventually makes financial sense for them, obviously. And it's all development. So I think and I'm glad that we've all had the chance to discuss it at this length. And I do, because I'm also in the architectural field and do historic preservation projects. It's a tough building itself, because it's a lightweight commercial industrial building that was never meant to be inhabited by, in the nature of the building was always supposed to be, cannery, industrial. It wasn't really meant for high quality level of use. It wasn't a conditioned space. It was more of I guess an industrial workspace. So just taking a building in the nature that it is and making it into a Class A office space or a retail space, that's a big change of use. But I guess in summary, I don't want to go on anymore, but these projects are hard. They're very difficult, and we don't want to lose our resources. However, I don't know. I guess that's that is the challenge. I see it as the process needs. We need to strengthen our process, and our ordinance needs to protect our resources a little bit better. I guess that's what I want to say.
Thank you. So I'd like to try and craft a recommendation, Council. So Claire, will you type for us so you can read it back? Because I'm going to be messy. Is that right? Okay. So in reviewing this project, the HRB would like to advise Council to request of the applicant that HABs-like documentation be performed for the whole building. Kristen, you can add other stuff in there, but I'm going to start with this. For the entire structure, let's call it the entire structure. I have trouble with this building thing. I would also like to put in there that an appropriate repository be established for this. And then furthermore, that post-construction analysis is conducted of the remaining structure. In order to add the monitor roof building section to the National Register. And thirdly, that the applicant look at additions to and separation from the monitor roof building in order to maintain eligibility for the National Register. How about in order to enable, just in case?
We got that.
Okay. So Christian, do you want to jump in? Or Claire, do you want to read it back first?
I would just like something in there about that. Actually, I believe Sobrato has done a good job of trying to look into this stuff, and I'm really impressed by their work with Thomas Fuchun's granddaughter and so forth. But I would really think they have an opportunity to begin to set a standard here in terms of situations like this, and that would be valuable to this community going forward. and to
Okay,
their
Christian, let me interrupt just a sec.
So-
So just as a matter of process, I would like us to craft a motion and then address
Okay, well,
specific issues with that.
I'm trying to get there. It's a little hard to do on the fly, but I think that whatever that exploratory work is around what they might finally do, that they seek out the most current information and expertise that's available, including industry groups that are working on this.
A comprehensive request for proposal, basically. Yeah.
Anybody else? Alicia?
Yes, for the post-construction evaluation, I'd also like to add that it be evaluated for the local listing, California landmark status, and also California point of historical interest status.
Good point on the point of historical interest, because that actually might be something we want to start pursuing now,
Yeah, that's a great point. I agree.
because that's really what it is. Want to read it back first?
Let me do I'll start it. So advise council to request of the applicant that HABs-like documentation be performed for the entire structure and that an appropriate repository be established for this. And I guess HABs, advise council to request for the applicant that HABs-like documentation be performed for the entire structure, seeking out the most current information and expertise available, and that an appropriate repository be established for this. And as well as a post-analysis construction is completed for the structure in order to add the monitor roof section to the National Register. And that the applicant, I'm sorry, I missed the last.
I'm going to just amend that. So the first one I'm going to amend to say, instead of request, that require is the word I heard for the HABs. And then the second thing would be adding on Alyssa's that change that said evaluate for local listing, California landmark status, and historical point of interest status. So far, then there's the third one.
I think those are the three things.
Then the third one I have is the applicant shall look at additions to and separate from the monitor roof building in order to
So separations from, not separations.
additions to and separations from.
Yeah.
I'm sorry to interrupt. This is Julianne. I'm the Rincon consultant. I'd just like to clarify that this building has not been evaluated for the National Register. It's only been evaluated for the California Register. And so I just want to make sure that that's clear, that it has not undergone evaluation for National Register listing. I just want to I think maybe we've been using National Register and California Register a little bit interchangeably.
Great. So this is I know it's a little sidebar here. Could you distinguish between the qualifications for National Register and California Register for us? Just briefly.
Yeah, absolutely. So the California Register criteria and the National Register, the National Register and California Register criteria mirror each other. They are basically identical. The California Register was modeled on the National Register, but when things are so something can be nominated for just the California Register. And when things are nominated and entered into the National Register, they are automatically also added to the California Register. So the evaluative framework is pretty much the same, except for the question of integrity is a little bit different between California and National Register. But the listing processes are distinct.
Okay. So I'm going for national. We're going to aim high. But because, I mean, the reality is this building hasn't been analyzed as a separate, it needs to be reanalyzed anyway after the construction or demolition is done. So do we want to read through this one more time? Does anybody know they have changes before we
So can I just ask one point of clarification, and maybe this is a question for our attorney, Albert Yang. Does the HRB need to actually recommend? Your motion says advise council to require. It doesn't make a recommendation to approve or deny the project. I'm not sure if it's necessarily required to do so. I don't know if you can speak to that, Albert.
Advising council to require. That's what it was.
I know, but
I don't believe there needs to be a recommendation on the project. So that's fine.
We only wish we had authority. Would you read it back first?
I'm happy to do so. Recommendation from Chair Willis as the motion to one, the HRB advises council to require HABs-like documentation for the entire cannery structure and an appropriate and establish an appropriate repository. Okay. Or an appropriate repository be established is how the wording was. Two, a post-construction analysis shall be conducted of the remaining structure in order to add the monitor roof building section to the National Register, evaluate for local listing California landmark status, state status, and historical point of interest status. And then three, the applicant shall look at additions to and separations from the monitor roof building in order to enable eligibility for the National Register of Historical Places.
And then I guess my question to all of us is, monitor roof building in this case is not really clear because that building was also the 340 building. It's noted on the plans is also a compilation of buildings, and I actually can't tell you how that happened. But do we need to be clear on that, or is that? I mean, I really just care about the monitor roof section. So
I think it's parcel 3 that encompasses the monitor roof section.
Well, that's what I'm saying. That in my perspective, if somebody determines down the road that it's, I don't feel the same about the section that does not have the monitor roofs
Correct.
as the section that does. So, as far as looking at additions and, I think it would be good if we could, okay, so let's say the section of the building with the monitor roofs instead of the monitor roof building. Does that clarify it?
I think we should probably say which parcel specifically out of the 5, because that's the way it's drawn up in the plans.
Right. And what I'm saying is that if they want to separate it right after the monitor roofs in the middle of that building, I'm fine.
Okay. In that case, it might not be, it's probably not split up for our uses in that way. But there was that one picture of just the 2 buildings with the monitor roofs, one of the historic images that shows just those 2. I don't know. And that was in your report, I believe, as well as the Sobrato report presentation. That is a good image.
So can we change it to the monitor roof section of the building? Does that make sense?
sure. I mean, I guess the only thing I would note is that the entire environmental impact report is concluding that it's no longer eligible for the California Register.
They're concluding the entire building is no longer, and since a third of it will be gone, I totally agree with them. But it has not been analyzed as a separate element.
Okay.
I'm sorry to interrupt again. This is Julianne from Rincon Consultants. When we undertake an evaluation of a historic resource, we look at the whole building. So I understand the interest in wanting an evaluation of just this portion of the building, but the way that evaluations are undertaken as guided by National Park Service and the Office of Historic Preservation is that we look at the whole building. We're not able to do an evaluation of just one piece of a building.
Totally understand.
For the purposes of secret.
So do we have further comments or questions? Or do I have a second?
Should we read the motion just so we can all, how is it, how is the motion read at the moment?
Okay, once more with feeling.
I'll try it again. I'm not changing it at all from what I wrote. That the HRB advised council to require HABs-like documentation for the entire cannery structure and establish an appropriate repository. 2, post-construction analysis shall be conducted of the remaining structure in order to add the monitor roof building section to the National Register, evaluate for local listing, California landmark status, and historical point of interest status. And then 3, the applicant shall look at additions to and separations from the monitor roof section of the building in order to enable eligibility for the National Register of Historical Places.
I think, just saying HABs like leaves, they're already saying they're doing that. I don't think that goes far enough. There needs to be, this needs to be augmented by the best technology available and practical.
Okay, HABs like documentation augmented by the best documentation
techniques available
current
and practical.
How about up to the minute? No, what can you say best?
Current.
That's current documentation.
So this is what I'm hearing is a amendment proposed and accepted by the amended a suggestion for the motion maker to change her motion to say augmented by the best technology, current technology available.
Should we just say that we recommend the council to require the developer to submit it to Library of Congress through the HABs process and get away from HABs like?
I mean, I think what would be nice for structure, sorry to jump in again, but I do think it would be nice to get a second, even if there's some tweaking to happen, because then people can propose amendments to the verbiage of the motion and then the maker of the motion can accept them.
I second.
Or not. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy. Okay, now we have power. What I've heard is the HABs documentation is kind of 3 steps. Well, no, I'm kind of hearing more that it's like set in a different time zone so that we have better ways of documenting things now, and the HABs is labor intensive and not necessarily advantageous. Christian, you're way up on this. What do you think?
The proposal is to use HABs as guidance. It will not qualify for HABs as it is, I don't believe, because it's really behind the curve with what's going on. So this is about, I'm fine with using the guidelines, but this needs to be augmented with what is available now.
Okay. So I will accept the motion with augmented documentation. No augmented reality, but augmented. So do we have further discussion?
I have one other suggestion on part 2, discussing the post-construction evaluation rather than to say add it to the National Register, to evaluate it for inclusion on the National Register.
Yes, evaluate and nominate if the evaluation, yeah.
So didn't I say with the goal of
I read what that would say if that was accepted by the maker of the motion. Post-construction analysis to be conducted of the remaining structure in order to evaluate it for inclusion and nomination on of the monitor roof building section to the National Register. And then the other listings.
I think that's fine. I mean, truthfully, I don't care if it's just the monitor roof section or if it's the whole 340, but I feel like looking at those drawings and the way the building evolved, maybe, and also the square footage, that maybe just keeping that, the part we can really read strongly from the back, that's 2 stories in the monitor roof, maybe that is the way to go, and I'm leaving that up to the architect. So are we ready to call a vote on this one? Oh, hooray. Okay.
Could we hear it back just one more time?
Okay.
Oh, am I on? Oh, state it one more time. Is that what it said? Okay, here goes. Motion by Chair Willis, seconded by Vice Chair Pease, that the HRB advises council to require HABs-like documentation for the augmented by the best current technology available using HABs as guidance for the entire cannery structure and establish an appropriate repository for the information. Yeah. Number 2, post-construction analysis be conducted of the remaining structure in order to evaluate it for inclusion and nomination. And then I have of the monitor roof status. And 3, the applicant shall look at additions to and separations from the monitor roof section of the building in order to enable eligibility for the National Register of Historical Places.
Veronica.
Okay. Board Member Eagleson Cheslowich?
Yes.
Board Member Heinrich?
Yes.
Board Member McKinnon?
Yes.
Board Member Roman?
Yes.
Vice Chair Pease?
Yes.
Chair Willis?
Yes.
Board Member Wimmer?
Yes.
Motion carries 7-0.
Mike, I just want to apologize. Out of sight, out of mind. I thought about you off and on, but I'm sorry to ignore you so much, but thank you. So
Thank you.
moving on, election of a chair and vice chair. Woof, woof. Do we have nominations?
I have a nomination. I would like to nominate Alicia Eagleston. Now, just let me try, because I looked this up online and I repeated it 20 times yesterday, but I'm not sure it's right. So let me try this. Siewicz. Sheklevich. Well, the pronunciation site, I tried 2 of them, were both off. Thank you.
I'll second that one. Do we have any further nominations?
I would like to nominate Samantha as vice chair.
Okay, I think maybe do these one by one. What do you think? So we're going to do chair first. Do we have any?
Second here.
Oh, I
I'll
seconded
second
it.
that. Okay.
Don't let me be too overeager here. And can we do a voice vote on this one?
Yes. Could we have a vote for chair?
Thank you. So all in favor? of our-
Aye.
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 Thank you. And opposed? Okay, great. So now do I let her take over for vice chair nominations?
Sure. Okay.
Are there nominations for vice chair?
I would like to nominate Samantha Rowan, right? Roman as vice chair of our committee.
I second that.
Are there additional nominations? All right, can we proceed to a vote?
Roll call vote? Sure.
Or is it a voice vote?
Voice vote, yeah.
Voice vote. Oh, okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Sorry, I'm new to this. All right, none opposed. Great.
It's good to have
All
a
in
little
favor, none
warm up.
opposed, is that right? That's right. Okay.
I think just typically you would take over at the next meeting, but that was fun. So, you know.
I thought it was good to have a little intro so she can know.
Got my feet wet. Yeah.
But I'm going to let you take on this questions, comments, or retreat, all that stuff that we need to still on the bottom of the agenda.
Okay. Are there, or is that for next time, or where are we at?
I'll participate in
something else about the voting cycle, the appointment? Isn't there something else in here about the election going forward of boards?
Yeah, change the ordinance. Sorry. That was me.
Yeah, it also includes
change.
modification of the bylaws in regards to.
That's on
Thank
today's
you,
meeting.
Christian.
Yeah. Thanks.
Now you know why I handed it over.
So we're approving the change in the bylaws? Is that, okay. So can we proceed directly to a vote, or do we need a motion?
Could we just,
Or do we need to discuss it?
Just
We're going to
explain
discuss. Okay.
Yeah, so let's just summarize that it's basically aligning our election cycle with council's appointment of new commissioners, board members. So I'll read it. Why not? I'm not going to read the existing, well, I guess I need to because we're only changing one sentence. So the offices of chairperson and vice chairperson shall be elected from among the appointed members of the board, and the person so elected shall serve for a term of 1 year or until a successor is elected. Elections shall be held at the first meeting in January of each year or as soon thereafter as possible. Well, we're kind of as soon thereafter as possible, but the attached HRB bylaws delete this last sentence in strikeout format and replace it with the following sentence in underlined form. Elections shall be held in the first regular meeting in April of each year or as soon thereafter as possible. So I think we probably do need a roll call vote on this one.
Board member Eagleson Cheslwood?
Yes.
Board member Heinrich?
Yes.
Board member McKinnon?
Yes.
Board member Roman?
Yes.
Vice Chair Pease?
Yes.
Chair Willis?
Yes.
Board member Wimmer?
Yes.
Motion carries 7-0.
Thank you.
So then I think we just proceed with finishing the meeting with you as chair. It makes it simpler.
Okay, I think,
Yeah.
I tried. Okay, good idea. So questions, comments? Do we have anything from past that you want to pass on, Gogo?
There is another walking tour this Saturday at 10 o'clock, and it's of Professorville. We meet almost in front of Alyssa's house on Cowper and Melville. So anyone want to join, that's going to happen.
And it is on the past website if you're looking for information.
Although there is an error in the meeting point on the website, they're going to be stationing someone at that location, but don't go to the corner of Addison and Bryant. Meet at essentially the corner of Cowper and Melville.
Are you going to serve tea?
Okay, so I would like to get a retreat on the books. So we have a conflict between the working week. Well, we have a conflict between people who have other jobs during the work week and people who have this job during the work week. I guess the question is whether we have our retreat on a Saturday or a Thursday. Amy, you want to start and weigh in? I don't think we have Alicia for much of the day on Thursday. I think we can count on a morning, right?
I mean, I can do like a meeting time, but it's challenging for me to come during the work week.
So the non-work week would be Saturday or Sunday, and Friday for staff. We have every other Friday we're off. So I don't know if that's, I mean, obviously that's still part of the work week for most people, but it's another conversation. I guess if it were to be June 24th, let's say that's a Saturday, I would be able to participate if it's wanting to be in June. I would say we would then not have a meeting 2 days before on the Thursday. We do have already a commitment for the 8th. The NV cap is coming to the HRB on June 8th. So I'm just looking at next month. So I would say we substitute the Thursday for the Saturday. Whether the board wants to meet on a Saturday.
It's highly unlikely.
Could you
Okay.
speak into the mic? Just 'cause
Well,
it's
I
hard.
think the problem is we don't all have our calendars here.
It is highly unlikely I will be able to attend a meeting in late June, but I think you ought to go ahead and do this meeting. I might be able to do it remotely if I can figure out a legal way to do that. So
I will not be available.
The month of June?
June 24th.
June 24th, yeah. And we get into July 8th is a kind of a holiday weekend. I mean, I guess we do have an option to.
Oh, 8th.
It's after July 4th. So it's not the holiday weekend. It's the Saturday after the holiday. So if people are.
I'm away.
If they're taking the week off. Okay. Yeah, I'm away. That was my concern there. So, I mean, we do have, since we're now farther out, we do have an opportunity to discuss this at the meeting of June 8th further and check calendars and come ready to discuss it on June 8th.
I'd like to try and do this by email because obviously we all have a lot of conflicts. So if everybody could just blindly, can everybody send me dates that are available?
I think, I mean, I'm happy to coordinate. And I think if we narrow down, a day of the week. So if we're saying this is Saturday and then we start talking about times, generally speaking, I mean, I would say I'm not available till noon. So maybe I can have another staff person come and help because I have an outside job that I do on Saturday mornings.
So can we just send you the weekend date, the Saturday dates were available, say through August? Does that seem reasonable?
And is morning or afternoon acceptable for you? Just because I'm interested, I would have to arrange something.
Yeah.
The subject of this is going to be going back over mills, right? Isn't that what we were going to?
And some other stuff.
Yeah, I think I heard ordinance. I would like to have some little more free-flowing conversations that weren't so directed. So yes, Mills Act is part of it. And full
community
disclosure.
outreach was something that we had talked about and reviewing that subcommittee and their actions for the purview.
So we do have to have it far enough in advance so that I can engage all of the trappings of recording the meetings and everything else. It may feel more informal if it's not in this chambers. I mean, we talked also about having it in the community room. I don't know about the availability on a Saturday of City Hall at all. So I'm not sure how that goes.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Can you start with that question?
I can
and
start
get
with
us an
that.
answer to that.
Mm-hmm.
Because that probably applies. Well, is there a room at Cubberley that's also wired where they had the human resources?
I have no idea.
We don't know. Okay. I just know Human Resources was over there last night, so.
We've been in the COVID environment for so long that we,
I know.
we've stopped having retreats in different places. So,
Well, I think I would be fine with the council member if we could do that, the meeting room. I'd be fine with my house if we could do that. But I guess we need to televise, right? Okay. Okay, so places and dates. So you'll ask that specific question, whether we could access for Saturday here.
yeah, I'll look into that and then I'll send an email out to the entire board, BCC, and you can respond to me individually as to your, which of the many dates. It's like doing a doodle poll, but in a different way.
August is often a time when people take off. I'm just wondering whether we would want to extend the window into early September.
Let's go September. Sure. Yeah, me too.
Just yeah.
July through September.
Early September, because things.
Oh, yeah. July through mid-September.
Yeah, maybe the first week or whatever.
Anything further? So to have a motion to adjourn?
I make a motion to adjourn.
Thank you.
Second?
Thank you. And all in favor? Aye. Opposed? And motion carries. Thanks.